Is it really that bad? Is it so bad to where there's so many ball pythons that no other breeder or no other seller or anyone can get access to any other reptiles? Well, in this video, I'm going to cover the numbers because, as I always say, numbers don't lie. And we're going to cover some of the pros and cons of there being the number of ball pythons that there are. Hey, how's it going, guys? It's Paul with Spheric Reptiles, and I thank you so much for tuning in. Again, if you're a new watcher, hey, thank you for watching. And if you're a returning watcher, hey, I much appreciate it, man. I really appreciate the feedback that we've been getting. Hopefully, I've been putting out some good videos that are helpful and insightful. And if you're a new breeder, just giving you a little bit of the groundwork as to where you can go. So one of the things that's being talked about is how the ball python has changed the reptile market for the better or worse. And that's what the title of the video is, but I will be diving into a sensitive subject. I mean, this is a sensitive subject. It seems like everybody skirts around it, they give their opinions, but a sensitive subject on how this topic has shaped the entire reptile community. Not the entire reptile community just in the US, even though that's where I'll be focusing, but in the entire reptile community globally. You see more people keeping reptiles, in particular ball pythons, than any other species. And we're going to cover some of those things. But what I would really like to point to focus with this video is the morph explosion, right? So the morph explosion, no matter what the species, ball pythons, boas, crested geckos, bearded dragons, you name it, if we can find a morph, we're going to try to extrapolate that, right? And that's what has really led to a lot of this, but I'm going to get into the numbers. So what's my goal? The goal with this video is I want to provide a clear picture of how the reptile industry has grown and how morphs have helped to accentuate that growth, whether it be positive or for the negative, and maybe some of the perceptions that are out there that are surrounding how one species does versus another. So, and I would like for you to let me know what you think. And if you like this at the end, please like and subscribe to the video. I really like seeing that. It helps to get the videos out as well. So why this video right now at the end of the year, as we're ending 2025, but why this video right now? Why am I putting it out? Well, when I'm looking at YouTube content for reptiles, which I tend to do as I am a breeder and I am a keeper of reptiles, what I tend to see when it comes to ball pythons, it's like one group says they're really cool, and then another group is like vehemently angry at the ball python, like the ball python has actually did anything to them. So what I've noticed about this, because I tried to fair balance it, because I do keep a lot of different reptiles, not just ball pythons, is I wanted to see what the pros and the cons of each would be. And what I looked at when I'm looking at the videos is a lot of it is based on personal opinion and not actual numbers. So the numbers just don't lie when it comes to the ball python and the relevance to the reptile community, not just at Expos, but I'm talking about the total reptile community. So whether we like them or love them, they do something for it. Now, it depends on how you see it, of course, because that's your own perception. You can see it as a good thing or a bad thing, but let me just get into the numbers. So who is the market? And as you're looking at this screen, you can see that there are currently 342 million people in the US. And if we take the 4% of that, then we see that we have about 13.7 million people that have reptiles. And as we know, these people that have the reptiles actually probably have more than one, right? So there's really no real numbers. And of course, I have all of my proof sources in the descriptions, but there's really no real numbers on the number of reptiles that each reptile keeper keeps. We know that there's some that are new entrants, and then there's some seasoned hobbyists or breeders that have multiple reptiles. But to actually say which area or who has more reptiles, it was very hard to get that. And that's when the numbers kind of started getting a little gray. But we do know that out of 342 million Americans, that if the reptile market has about a 4% market share, that's 13.7 million people that have at least one reptile, right? So, and I think that's a good thing. But if we look at on the flip side, like I always say, we got to fair balance it for dogs and cats and even small animals. Those numbers are way bigger when it comes to those other animals. So we're looking at about 50 to 52% of all households in America have a dog. And about 35 to almost 40% of them that either have a dog or not have a cat. So if we look at those numbers, we can see that our numbers are very small for the reptile market. So in making this video, I just really wanted to put it out there that, hey, let's not hurt the reptile market, right? We're already having enough issues where we need U.S. ARC to go and fight for our rights to even keep these. So let's not dogfight in amongst ourselves in the reptile community about something that's so trivial. Because if you don't want something, just don't get it. Get the other one. I mean, it's that easy. But let me get into the numbers of how many breeders we've had from 2000, 2010, 2020, up to 2025. I think these numbers will be alarming. So when you're looking at the chart on the screen, you see that in total breeders in the year 2000, we only had 4,000 breeders. Now of those, you know, we got 520 breeders of ball pythons, about 480 breeders of boa constrictors, 40 crested gecko breeders, and out of the bearded dragons, about 300 breeders. So it was pretty much even all the way across the board. But when we go into 2010, as you're looking at the screen, we got 9,000 breeders total, 3,000 ball python breeders, which is a big jump. And then we have 1,100 boa constrictor breeders, as well as 917 crested gecko breeders and 1,375 bearded dragon breeders. So you can see it's still kind of growing when we go from 2000 to 2010. So what happened during that time? That's when we started seeing these morphs. That's when the morphs came available and people saw that they can get some variety in what they were offering. So when they found these new pairings, they were able to cash in on the new morphs that they created, because now they had something that was a little bit more interesting, something that people hadn't seen. But this wasn't in particular to the ball python or any one species at that time, because even at this time, even though I didn't put the numbers, Burmese pythons and reticulated pythons were at high numbers of breeding as well. So what happened in 2020? So 2020 marked a little bit of a change. We saw a greater impact. We had some people that had been in the business, and because of the morphs that they had made, the ball python pushed forward a lot more. In 2020, there were 13,000 breeders of reptiles, approximately 13,000, going from 4,000 in 2000 to 13,000 20 years later is a lot. I mean, that's a lot. And so if we look at the other species, 6,500 of them were ball python breeders, 1,300 were boa constrictor breeders, 2,600 were crested gecko breeders, as well as 2,400 bearded dragon breeders. So if we look at that, then we can see that all of the species, and we're just talking about the top 4 species that you see on the marketplace or in an expo or online or something. So all of them seemed like they were still growing up. So what happened? What happened? Well, COVID is what happened. And when COVID happened, a lot of things changed. So we had a lot of people that were at home and they had some extra money. They were bored. They were sitting in the house, and they were like I am right now, sitting on the couch, thinking of what they could spend their money on. So they were doing home improvements, but they were also buying reptiles, and in particular buying ball pythons, because when they looked online, they saw big numbers that people were making from these ball pythons. And it happened a little bit before COVID, but after and during COVID, it definitely happened. So now in 2025, this is what we have. We got about 14,500 breeders of all reptiles, 8,000 breeders of ball pythons, 1,305 approximately of boa constrictor breeders, 2,900 crested geckos, and 2,900 bearded dragon breeders. So now we see that some of the species continue to grow and some of the species grew exponentially, and, you know, just formed the number of breeders. So that's not even, I'm not even talking about how many animals were being produced, but I'm just talking about how many people or groups were breeding reptiles of the top 4. So what was the rationale? Well, for one, the dollar was a rationale. So the dollar was a rationale. It's not necessarily tied to any particular species, because there are a lot of morphs that are out there that were costing a lot of money. But when we look at the highest priced reptiles, those were ball pythons. So that carrot that was waved in front of the horse was there for some people. When they looked at it, they saw they saw that they could make, probably, they were hoping that they could make a windfall of money, right? They were hoping that they could buy a $25,000 ball python, breed it to a $5,000 or $1,000 ball python, and end up with more $25,000 ball pythons. Well, we know that that didn't happen because the supply increases, the demand goes down. So the dollar travels with the demand and the supply. Rarely will you have a low supply and a low demand. Well, if you do, you don't have a market. But if you have a high supply, then the demand has to go down. And likewise, if the demand is high and the supply is low, then you definitely have a higher price point. So that's what we had, guys. So that's how we ended up with over 14,500 total breeders. And of that, 8,000 of these people in 2025 breed ball pythons. So is that a negative thing? I mean, the morph explosion is there. So the thing that I see, and let me know what you think, is, you know, and I know you see reptiles on the screen, but let me know what you think, because whenever I'm looking at vlogs, whether they're on Instagram, YouTube, in particular YouTube, you see full length videos where people are really just talking bad about the ball python. But the ball python is not an evil species. It's a pretty species, and the fact that there's over 8,000 different color combinations allows a lot of people to have exactly what they want. Now, if we look at the boa constrictors, they have some pattern varieties because, let's face it, most boa constrictor breeders aren't breeding locale specific boa constrictors only. They're breeding pattern morphs as well. I mean, they have BCIs, right? They're not all breeding BCCs. So that's one of the things that really struck me, is how many boa constrictor breeders are so negative about ball pythons. But ball pythons are a lot smaller, just like there are some other species that are smaller and just easier to keep on the entry level. So if we had to look at the top 4, ball pythons stay relatively small. Bearded dragons and crested geckos have such a nice personality and demeanor, and their overall care is very easy. I would say that the crested gecko is the easiest reptile to actually care for because it doesn't have all the lighting need. It doesn't have all of the cricket need. There's a prepared diet, but it's still easy. And the bearded dragon is still easy as well. But when we look at the boa constrictor, which boa constrictors are one of my favorite species. In fact, it is my favorite species. They get a little big. So for a lot of people, just knowing how big it gets, that kind of turns them away. So you got a different audience that would buy a boa constrictor than that would buy a ball python, right? Because of the sheer size as an adult. But what else? What else while I'm talking about it? So all of the top species are easy to breed. And in particular, ball pythons, there's a lot more people breeding them. So there's a lot more information out there. There's shed testing that helps to kind of move everything forward, so people kind of know what they're going to get before they even start breeding. Crested geckos and bearded dragons are relatively easy to breed. In fact, they breed more than once a year. But when we look at the boa constrictor, the one thing that holds it back from a breeding standpoint is the fact that it takes them a little bit longer to reach sexual maturity, even though once they do have their babies, because they're viviparous, they actually have live births. They're going to have anywhere from 15 to up to 50 plus babies that are right there at one time. So it kind of weighs itself out, but you do have to wait a little bit longer. And sometimes you can't breed them back to back. And I think that's where the numbers are. But the one thing I'm going to fair balance this, the boa constrictor breeders tend to be more ethical in their breeding, if there is such a thing. I don't know if there is such a thing as ethical breeding, because we're all breeding for profit. But they tend to take the time to breed their animals correctly, or not as often as other of the other top breeders. Now, in particular, what I always suggest is that you try to create something new. And if you can't create something new, then why make it when you can buy it? Because that's just something, right? So what about the Expos? So how did this all affect Expos? So I'm going to date myself. So in the 90s, there were only about 50 reptile expos nationwide for the whole year. Now, me living in Texas, I can only remember 2. And that was at the Knights of Columbus. They had 2 reptile expos a year. All of the breeders would come there. You didn't know if it was captive bred or if it was wild caught. The one good thing about that is the reptile community was so inviting of anyone who walked through the door. Now, the education part was not so much there because they weren't really selling the animals to breed. They were selling the animals to keep. So I kept some incredible reptiles in the 90s. Now, let's fast forward to 2000. So how many reptile expos did we have then? We had about 200 reptile expos nationwide in 2000. Now, if we look at that number before, we can see that the number of breeders increased, so the number of reptile expos increased. And so they kind of went hand in hand. The expos don't increase in number if there aren't people that are willing to buy the tables. Now, if we look at 2020, then there were about 550 reptile expos nationwide. And today in 2025, there's around 750 reptile expos nationwide. So why is this? Well, that same morph explosion, right? And COVID, right? So you had more people breeding, in particular ball pythons, so they're out there. But this is where I think a lot of people put their opinion in. So I'm gonna put mine in right here, right? So I do vend at reptile expos. I like them. The tables are relatively inexpensive, about $125 for a local show, up to about $450 if you have to pay for electricity, if you do an NARBC show or a bigger show. So, and it's just part of it. You know, you pay to be in a bigger show so you can get more exposure, and then maybe you can take some different animals there, and maybe you can sell a different price range of animals. I mean, it just makes sense, right? But if we look at this same morph explosion, somebody's got to pay the bills. So with that number that we see that we have more ball python breeders, so there's more ball pythons at the show. But it's not just because ball pythons are just out there, it's because they actually sell, right? And crested geckos sell, bearded dragons sell, and boa constrictors sell. So when you go to a reptile expo, you're less likely to see this animal, a yellowtail crebo, at a show, especially as a hatchling. You're less likely to see a rare species of rat snake from Southeast Asia, like a Chinese king rat snake at a reptile show. You're less likely to see that. And unless you're in certain areas, you're not even going to see an Aldabra tortoise or even one of the rare iguana species like a spiny tail iguana. I mean, you're just not going to see them unless you go to a reptile expo, right? I mean, just because when you go to a pet store, you're not going to see these rare species because the people that breed these are so small in numbers that they don't have to. They can sell their animals on an online platform like Morph Market, but you know, hey, it's just one of the things. So someone has to pay for the tables. So with that, that's where the ball python breeders, the crested gecko breeders, and the bearded dragon breeders come in. Now, other people can step in. So now you have a lot of inverts. You have boa constrictors in there as well. But the biggest thing is that you have supply people that are selling reptile supplies or frozen feeders or live feeders at these same reptile expos. So the reptile expos are in high numbers because of the ball pythons. But, you know, I don't think you believe me. I really don't think you believe me because you think that I'm just saying anything. But let me show you Morph Market numbers. So Morph Market has been around since 2016, 2015. And let me just go over these numbers on the screen. So since 2015, Morph Market has sold 887,183 animals. And this is of December the 6th, 2025. Now, of those, the ball pythons represent 442,314, which is 50%. Now, if we look at the boa constrictors, they're still selling at 44,838, which represents 5%. This is the total amount that they've sold. If we look at the number of crested geckos, it's 67,443, which represents 8%. And that bearded dragon is at 33,526, which represents 4%. And I'm looking at my sheet over here. But so that's how many they've sold. So we can see that the lion's share is the ball python. So if you have a rack system, if you have a really good thermostat, if you have all these other things, a lot of that comes from the market leader. That's not just in reptiles, that's all across the board. So when we look at the market leader, which is in this day and time is ball pythons, it's driving this innovation into these nice PVC enclosures, even though PVC enclosures are made in different sizes. But what's the likelihood that someone would be profitable just making PVC enclosures for reticulated pythons, boa constrictors, or Burmese pythons? You know, they need that volume too. The same thing that goes with the ARS and Freedom Breeder racks. They need that volume. And then the rodent breeders, they are definitely benefiting from the ball python, I mean, they are benefiting from the other animal species, the other snake species, but the ball python in particular pays their bills as well. Because if we look at the 8,000 ball python breeders, and we say that everybody has at least, if you're a breeder, you have at least 100 snakes, right? And I know it's a crazy number, but if you have 100 snakes and 8,000, they all need to be fed. They all need to be housed. So that's a lot of housing and a lot of feeding, and that's a lot of substrate. That's a lot of everything, water dishes, you name it, that are driving this motivation for even now Chewy.com to get into our industry of reptile keeping, so that they are offering products too now at a much higher clip than they were offering when they first came out, and they only cater to dogs and cats, right? Because remember, it's Chewy.com, so they cater to dogs and cats. So what's Morph Market doing now? So currently, there are 72,334 animals being sold, 33,505 ball pythons, 3,911 boa constrictors, 6,442 crested geckos, and 830 bearded dragons. Of course, all these numbers fluctuate throughout the year, but you can see that even over the full 10 years, almost 11 years that Morph Market has been in existence, the ball python is always at or near 50%. And that's because of the breeders driving it. So I'm not saying if this is good or bad. One of the pros of it is that we get more reptile expos, right? So when there's more breeders, then we can have more reptile expos that are more accessible to you, right? But then when you go into these reptile expos, if you see a lot of ball pythons, just chalk it up. If you're not interested in ball pythons, go and look at the next animal species. I have yet to go to a reptile expo and see 100% ball pythons. Like, I've never went to a reptile expo and saw 100% crested geckos, boa constrictors, or bearded dragons, right? So there's always a good mix, and the mix is based upon these same percentages that you're seeing on Morph Market. One of the cons is that if you're looking for a specific species, sometimes you just don't see it because either A, those breeders of those animals aren't in a position to where they can actually get a table, they might be too far, or they might be locked out of those tables. Now, that is a realistic thing because the way reptile expos work is if you go and you secure a table for this show, then as long as you keep paying for it, you can continue to secure that table. Now, one of the things that we've seen recently, especially with the economy going up and down and being uncertain, is that there are a lot of people getting out. So if you're looking at a reptile expo as your place to sell, then you might be able to get in now. But the one place that I think that everybody can sell when you use social media correctly is on Morph Market. So that's one of the pros of this. So the more people that go to sites like that or to expos, the more likely, if you're in those positions, that you'll be seen. And then if you can use social media, it highly increases your likelihood of being seen just that much more. I hope that this is all helping. I love reptiles. And the one thing that I don't want us to do is to have more infighting. So hopefully these numbers that I've shared with you are just putting a little bit more light, fair balancing things. So, you know, if there are more ball pythons, but that doesn't stop someone from breeding more animals, right? Everybody's got to do what's best for them. We are definitely diversifying here at Spheric Reptiles. You saw the yellowtail crebo. I don't really show that animal or those animals that often because right now is part of their breeding season, you know. So I'm trying to make sure that they get to develop as much as they can and do what they need to do so that we can present some different animals as well. But hey guys, I'm definitely interested in your comments. And as I said before, like and subscribe to the video if you feel. And if nothing else, guys, enjoy that time that you spend with your reptiles and cherish and love the family while you have them. Thank you.